This is Coder Radio, episode 135 for January 5th, 2015. Hi everyone and welcome to Coder Radio, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly talk show taking a pragmatic look at the art and business of software development and related technologies. This episode is brought to you by our two fine sponsors, DigitalOcean and Linux Academy. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our excellent host, who's established on the East Coast, Mr. Michael Dominic. Hey there, Michael.
Helps if I unmute. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Mr. Dominic. Started off strong. It's the new year. Got to go in strong. First episode. I think that's appropriate. It's real quite good. How was your New Year's?
Yeah, it was good. I was working most of it, actually.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, me too, actually. But we ended up having friends over New Year's Day, the 1st, which is always nice. Because we don't get to see them very often, and they have kids that are our kids' age, so they come over, and we always discuss, like, the podcast we're listening to. And, recent games. Like, basically, whenever they come over, I always end up buying a Steam game. That always seems to happen. So it's always a good time. It's a good excuse to see people and do a little extra here and there. So last week generated quite a bit of discussion. You were all fired up. We got quite a bit of feedback. I picked out a few good ones. Like, I just figured we wouldn't go into all of them. In fact, I didn't want to most of them, but I thought there was a couple of really poignant ones, and I wanted to grab those. So I have broken the feedback up in a very structured way to make it really feel like it's moving for everybody. So first up is stuff not really related to last week's. New topics we can just discuss. Then after that, I got something kind of cool the community's been working on we're going to talk about, and then we'll get into specific follow-up to last week's episode. Look at me. Like I'm planning. You like that? Like I'm all planning.
You're planning, you're moving. You are, dare I say, organized.
You know what it is? It's just I think I'm getting good at doing this. I don't know what it is. I didn't even mean to. I got to give you a full disclosure before we start. I do not know what's going to happen. I felt a little groggy all day. I didn't.
No.
I had like a couple of drinks after last on Sunday, and I just didn't sleep quite right. This is why I don't drink anymore. Right there, because it messes with the sleep. Nothing's more important than the sleep. So what do? I have a couple of drinks. And so I don't sleep quite right. So then I get into the studio and I forget to bring my lunch because I'm a dumb person who cannot remember things in the morning. I'm on rails. I'm like a game on rails in the morning. I got a couple of extra bonuses and achievements I sometimes can get, but I'm essentially on rails. And so if I got to pick up a meal that I prepared for myself in the fridge, well, that's not on the track. So I don't pick up that meal. So then I get to the studio and I realize I don't have any lunch for today. So what do? Of course, the only thing that's in the studio right now is rice. So I make myself a big bowl of rice. I eat all of that. And then I feel kind of groggy because I just had a big bowl of rice, so then I drink an energy drink. So that was my 30 minutes before I got on air. So who knows what could happen.
That's a feature.
Yeah. All right, so let's move into our feedback. PT Dave writes in. He says, what to do? I have a dilemma. I have a project that I've been working on for a few months now that I've written in Go and AngularJS. Without giving too much details out on what it is, it's quite nice. Now, I plan on developing it for free and for my school district. But I'm at a bit of a commercial dilemma. Get ready for this, Mr. Dominic. I really want to give something back to the community for open source, but I also want to make money. As I've mentioned before, I'm not a programmer by title, but I have the skills as I can jump and adapt between nearly every language. So my question is, do you and the listeners believe it is better to release it on GitHub as open source and sell it as a big portfolio option, or sell it as a service on my own, or keep it closed source and maybe keep all the potential revenue to myself? Eager to hear your opinions, PT Dave. Mr. Dominic, do you have any opinions? You got to unmute again. You're on a trip. You're like almost 2 for 3 over there.
Skype is the enemy.
Yeah, I know. You know what we need to do is get a big budget and fly you out here every Monday.
That would be awesome. Yeah, would be awesome.
So what do you think? Any opinions on his dilemma?
As always, it depends, right? It depends on the project. Open source, if there's some kind of revenue model where you can make it on service and support, great. If you're actually selling the code itself as a binary, you probably need to go commercial.
I kind of feel like we need to do a reality check here. So PT Dave, I mean, I love you, man. You're a great audience member, and when I read this, a couple of things you say jump out at me. Number one, you said, as I've mentioned before, I'm not a programmer by title. then are you really making something that has like some amazing revenue potential? Like realistically, how likely are you going to make money from this? Like if you step out and look at it as like and this is really hard to do sometimes. Before you've entered the market, it's sometimes hard to fully understand and assess the market. You think you know it, you look at all of the dynamics externally, but then when you actually get inside those dynamics, the market turns out to be a lot different than you thought it was. And I'm just curious if you actually have a chance at making money at this, because that should be a serious consideration. I wouldn't just automatically assume you're going to make money. Not to be harsh. So yeah, that's all. If you think you can, I mean, then it's really up to you and how much. Here's PT Dave. If you're really struggling, I guess maybe consider this. What do you have to do to make sure it continues to be a success? What option is viable to you to be able to afford to do that? And how much time do you have to dedicate to this? If you don't have a lot of time to dedicate to this, but you still want it to be a success, well, then you could leverage the input of the open source community to continue to make it better. And that would be essentially free labor for you. However, if you have time to dedicate to it all the time and essentially be a one-man show for it, it might make sense to maybe not and keep it exclusive to yourself. It just depends on those dynamics, I think. It's a hard one, and I like the word dynamics. All right, Mr. Dominic, unless you have anything else, I'm going to move on. Keep it tight. JB Hawk writes in. He says, for 5 years now, I've been listening to the JB shows, and I disagree with Mike's stance on unpaid internships. And would support a law that strongly restricts them to organizations like 501(c)(3)s and the like for the following reasons. Now he's going to do a teardown, Mike. Get ready for yourself. Number 1, false advertising and false expectations. By example, internships, like college ones, just like their apprenticeships, were invented with the intent of accelerating the onboarding process. If the business is unable to compensate an intern, even with a small stipend, then they certainly lack the budgetary means to hire them at the end of the internship. Business owners should focus on growing their revenue instead of milking free labor. Boom! Take a non-U.S. example, Spain, which in recent years relaxed its own internship laws. Many Spanish corporations now have drastically reduced hiring altogether and rely on steadily recycling free interns every 11 months. I would support unpaid internships if and only if the employer guaranteed full-time employment at the end of the 11-month program with a local market compensation. If their employer cannot commit to this, their business is running on a shoestring and requires attention elsewhere. All right, so I'll stop there because I had some thoughts on that. That definitely is a line of thinking that makes sense, and I can't necessarily disagree with it. But I would maybe add, it depends on the situation.
Yeah, it's also a premise you haven't proven, right? I mean, I certainly agree, right? Like, if you can't meet payroll, then interns aren't going to solve your problem, not because it's wrong, but because they're just not that good, right? I mean, not to be mean, but they're interns.
Yeah, well, and see, that's, I guess, so here's the two factors that, so what I feel like is not being considered is the fact that they are a burden on the business because training is one of the most expensive, time-consuming things you can do. So there's that aspect to it. But also, I think if you look at different businesses, different situations apply. When you're talking about your Googles, your Microsofts, your Apples, this seems like a no-brainer. When you're talking about your Jupiter Broadcastings, well, an intern, if an intern came in here and had, like he says here in his example, an 11-month internship at Jupiter Broadcasting. Well, in 11 months, an intern could come into Jupiter Broadcasting, work for free, but easily have created a show that has a couple of sponsors and could be paying a wage at the end of that 11 months. So it sort of depends on the business because some small businesses you can go in and sort of burrow out yourself a little revenue source and pay for yourself, and then they can hire you at the end of it.
I mean, we had an intern over the summer and fall who, I mean, granted, we always did paid internships, so he was paid, but you know, he came in right as we were really ramping up some of our Xamarin development, and he got to go through that whole experience of, you know, he was like in the room when the decision was made. We're going to try out Xamarin for some projects, right? He was there as we, you know, first called the Xamarin people, got the licenses, dealt with the crazy issues with memory on Android, right? Like, I you know, whereas let's say at Google, he might have been getting someone coffee. Just throwing it out there. Now, I know for the writer, it's different because he was paid at FTT, but...
Right. Well, and you think about it, too, the video editing and production skill set that an intern would pick up here, there's no way, like, you would be able to get, like, that hands-on kind of editing unless you're just doing it day in and day out. It seems very valuable to me, but I guess sometimes I think about it differently. And he also goes on to mention increased social inequity. Proponents of unpaid internships naively presume that the individual is already financially supported by families or friends. This recession has changed all of that, the recent one. Parting thoughts. Paid internships are a solid litmus test for a business's commitment to hire you, i.e., if they're going to pay you, that's a test to pass if they're going to actually keep you. Again, I don't necessarily, I think, if some of his premise is correct, then yeah, I think it just depends. But I guess the internship thing is just interesting. I continue to hear a good counter argument. I really appreciate everybody sending that in. I think I continue to still look at it a little differently than the audience, and I do not mean to be age biased at all, but I would be curious if those of you, if you do want to follow up with your thoughts, if you wouldn't mind sort of giving maybe your general age range, just because I'm curious if it's a younger versus older expectation thing, or if that's just a totally misread on my part. I could be totally wrong, but you know what I'm totally right about? DigitalOcean.
Yes.
Sponsor of the Coder Radio program. Head over to DigitalOcean.com right now. And we've got an awesome retro promo code. They're doing a transition. And so we get to keep the December code for a little bit longer, which doesn't that feel sort of late when you get to use the December code in January? Like you're a time traveler? Anyways, go over to DigitalOcean.com and use our promo code SNAPDecember. Just remember that. You can apply that to your account. You're going to get a $10 credit. But let me tell you about DigitalOcean and why you'd probably want a $10 credit. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's get real here. DigitalOcean is a simple cloud hosting provider. And they are dedicated to offering the most intuitive and easy way to spin up a cloud server. I actually spun one up just a little bit before the show today. I've been monkeying around with increasing the size of Jupiter Broadcasting's own cloud storage backend. And I was trying out different various ways of doing snapshots and doing a backup server and doing some private networking with the backend storage. And I also got to mess around with the root password reset. And, of course, I was working a lot in the HTML5 console. And I'm doing all of this on DigitalOcean just because the interface is so great. I really have no hesitation. And the prices are so reasonable that to try something out like this for a little while, it's essentially, it's almost at no cost. Because you can get started in less than a minute to create a server. And the pricing plans are $5 a month. Well, I just needed to do something for a few days. But for $5, I get 512 megabytes of RAM. 20 gigabyte SSD, their SSDs throughout, 1 CPU, and a terabyte of dedicated transfer. And they have data center locations in New York, San Francisco, Singapore, Amsterdam, and London. But it's really the interface. It's super, super great. I spent some time in there just, right before the show, and I'm still going, this is, I'm like almost over a year into using DigitalOcean now, and I'm still blown away by the interface. I have deployed massive VMware ESX implementations and Zen systems, and we have Proxmox here at the Jupiter Broadcasting Studios. And of course, I've worked with just all the different breeds of VMware and VirtualBox and KVM, of course, right? But I have never seen an interface like this. Not one that works on such a global scale, with the DNS management, the snapshot, and one-click installations using the most modern Linux technologies all built in. It's really awesome. And go over to DigitalOcean.com. Try out your own Droplet for 2 months for free when you use our promo code CODERDecember. CODERDecember. And it's a retro one. So CODERDecember will get you that $10 credit while it lasts. You can go in there and get there, try it out, and be pretty impressed. I got to say, OwnCloud 7 is getting legit for me. I have my phone contacts and notes syncing to OwnCloud. I use all my show notes when I save them. I save them up to OwnCloud now. And we're starting to get more and more of our production stuff into OwnCloud. And I have it running on a DigitalOcean Droplet, and I just have that peace of mind. We go in there, we take snapshots from time to time. It's great. So go over to DigitalOcean, use the promo code CODERDecember when you check out, and try them out. DigitalOcean.com. And a big thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the Coder Radio program. So we've been talking about the openyourmouth.recipes website, something we launched here. It's open source recipes written in Markdown up on GitHub. We're asking the Jupiter Broadcasting audience to contribute, and then we're going to pick some out, and I think I'm going to make a few. There's been an interesting development around it. 19 Keister wrote into the show on the subreddit and says, I've created a public web interface for the recipes. Now, it's still a work in progress. Like a couple of things I would like to see changed is maybe move the domain. And right. I think it requires some change to the Markdown files themselves that we're still thinking about. But check this out. This is what I love about our audience, is they've embraced this so much. He's created a fully mobile-ready interface so you can be in the kitchen and browse all of the new recipes that have been submitted by the community. So he has it all broken down right here. So, of course, let's go into maybe appetizers. And here you see bacon cheese balls and savory muffins are in there. And, of course, if you swipe back, you can go and get your breakfast recipes, and they're all broken out. Now, right now, because the changes haven't been made to the GitHub files, they don't render quite right. But it looks really neat, and it's just so cool to see the audience Not only embrace the recipe site, but now go create interfaces that make it more practical. So we'll have a link to the blog post where he talks about it. It's pretty neat. He says, I used Apache, which is basically a theme to cover up the hideous Apache folder index, and Docs on Clearance, a Ruby script that enables your Apache web server to serve Markdown rendered as HTML. Then on top of all of that, I use Bootstrap to add a simple navigation to the top and basic sticky footer to the bottom. That's pretty cool. Yeah, that is really neat. He says, I also modified the license file and put it in Markdown. And he also made a video about it too, which is just amazing. So we'll have links to that in the show notes. And you can check out the recipes at openyourmouth.recipes, and you can submit your own too. It's a good way to play around with GitHub and whatnots. All right, Mr. Dominic. Now let's get into our feedback for last week's topic, Fair and Balanced, Coder Radio 134, where we talked about, we tried to take two sides to the tech industries, to the big tech companies' stance on immigration, and potentially trying to lessen the cost of labor. So Tadcan says he wants to take a dissenting voice on the direction of our conversation last week in 134. Specifically around technology hubs, which is a point that I think you talked about pretty well. And he says the technology hubs that we see now are a product of human nature. Even before technology, there were parts of the world that were known for the new wave of paintings, medicines, learnings, or whatever. Back to ancient Greece and to Baghdad during the European Middle Ages, to the Enlightenment in coffee houses, people were drawn to where big discussions of the day were being had. He says, as an example, in 2012, a flood hit Thailand, which knocked out all the factories that outright made just all of the parts for hard drives. The downside to hubs can clearly be seen in Detroit, so no, I'm not arguing that they're universally a good thing. It's just that they just exist. They don't just exist because of money. He argues they exist because it's also just human behavior. He says, the other argument I wanted to address is that the American programmer who keeps their money stateside. Does this person not buy a Samsung product or any product made by a non-American company? Even if they only bought Apple products, they're still made in China. And the profits constantly circle through the globe. Through a warren of tax holes. So to argue 100% of money earned by American-borns versus someone who came over with a work permit or green card is a false argument. The U.S. still is globally the largest economy. The land of freedom, liberty, and opportunity, regardless of any recent political events in America, still holds a powerful allure for the world. Does it matter if he sends some money back to South America or if he created a company that is keeping you guys in the space race? So what do you think of this argument?
Yeah, there's a couple of things.
He's talking about Elon Musk at the end there.
Yeah, I know. Elon Musk also thinks we're summoning a demon literally right now. First of all, just a little cheeky, right? There are other reasons you shouldn't buy a Samsung device, starting with that they're crap. Oh, Jesus. Oh, God. I'm sorry. Can we just pause for a second? I have had to do specific QA rounds on Samsung devices separate from all other Android devices in the last 2 weeks. It has been unbelievable.
Yeah, I used to be a fan of the Samsung. You know, the things about Samsung I like are the screens and the removable battery, but I just, no, not my thing anymore. So it doesn't surprise me that you've run into issues with that. So what are your thoughts, though, on that hubs are just human nature?
Lots of things are human nature that aren't good, right? And I think maybe, he's reading me as saying, shame on you, bad, bad, bad. Yes, there's foreign trade. I don't think foreign trade is particularly evil, right? It's okay to trade, to buy Samsung devices, even though you're making your local developer cry a little bit. It's totally okay to buy toys that are made in China. I think perhaps I either overstated it or he felt I overstated it. The real issue to me is more when you bring someone on an H-1B1 visa, you have no guarantee that they're going to stay. Whereas someone who's a natural U.S. citizen or natural British citizen is far more likely just to stay, right?
I don't know. Canada's looking pretty attractive these days.
You know what? You would hate Canada, and you know it. You would hate it. The day your tax bill came, you'd take a stroke.
Dude, the day my tax bill comes today, I have a stroke. It's
right.
Unbelievable.
Canada's so much higher.
I don't know. I was doing no comparison with Alan, and I think he pays slightly less than I do.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that a lot of the people who are very pro-immigration are also very anti-internship, which is odd because they effectively do the same thing. Or if your argument is that internships devalue developers, which I don't really believe, but okay. Saying that the H-1B1 thing is a good thing is a little weird because that I guess literally designed to devalue developers.
So why? So it seems like the immigration thing, the alternative, these companies. I mean, these companies don't take no as an answer. What they're going to do is just open up more offices in other countries where the wages are lower, right? Isn't that just what they would do? Is just open up like little tech cities over in areas. I mean, that's kind of what they're doing now. I mean, it seems like the real problem isn't solved. The real problem is that this type of job can be done anywhere in the world as long as you have an internet connection. And that's what the real competition is right now. You know, they want to have it both ways. They want to have the wages suppressed. They want to bring in extra work, and they also want to do it right there in their home offices.
Well, they want it both ways, but I mean, I don't want to get into this conversation again.
All right, okay, all right, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't.
The thing they want is less about their home office and more that they want the guy who's changing the color blue on the widget on the website also needs to be like a tier 1 developer.
Yeah.
Right. They don't want to have think about. I don't know, plumbers, right? There's the best plumber in New York, and then there's, decent plumbers, and then there's your cousin Jim. And they all seem to get work. I feel like a lot of these large tech companies are doing is trying to, like we have this constant, 10 times better than the average programmer. Has anyone actually proven that in any quantifiable way? And also, how would you define better? And more experience? Is it better at design?
I would think better. It'd be maybe a better thinker, a better.
But what is better thinker? Someone who's very art and design oriented. Is that a good thinker, or is it someone who's very calculus and trigonometry and very googly?
It's very vague, so therefore it's very hard to define. Yeah.
I think what's happening is Google in particular is super selecting for those kind of nerdy mathematics based people, right? Which isn't bad, right? They have the right to do that. Where I take issue is this kind of false argument that as developers, because we're all egotistical jerks, we fall into and saying, A developers are 10 times better than, B developers. But the implicit statement there is also that, of course, the person saying that thinks he's an A developer. And the majority, bell curves, right? We're all probably average. And there's very few really bad developers and very few really good developers. Yet, this industry hasn't broken out that way, right? Go on monster.com, look up junior development jobs and look as they ask for 3 to 5 years of experience, entry level. Not universal to software development, right? I'm sure this happens in an IT admin. I'm sure this happens in freaking accounting or
probably
whatever.
Happens also to every major industry as it starts to mature and become more accessible to everybody, less specialized.
Yeah. Right. So it's, the reality of this is a little sad, right? No one's going to get what they want. You keep saying that the big companies are going to get what they want, but they're not, right? What they want is extreme. They want, if you can write Java, we can have you come to the U.S., period. They're not going to get that, right? They're going to have to make special cases and do the thing where they write a job description for someone that they already know they want to hire, but they have to make it look like they couldn't hire someone else, right? Which happens all the time.
I'm sorry, it sounded a little bit like conspiracy bacon. Just a little bit.
Well, we've seen it happen. I mean, we've had people, if you go back a few months, write in about it happening.
Yeah.
So.
That's true.
It's fine, right? The status quo is going to be what it is. Eventually, what's really going to change? There are going to be less other jobs that are middle class, and we're just going to have more programmers. And that's eventually just going to devalue it across the board.
Boy, that's positive, but probably it'll be a long time in coming.
Right, it's going to be at least a generation.
Yeah, let's pick it up and let's get off this topic. I think we're gonna get down if we talk about this topic too much. I wanted to plug, it just dawned on me, Women's Tech Radio, new show on the Jupiter Broadcasting Network. Episode 7 just came out, and I think the show is really starting to hit its stride. It really kind of started to hit its stride a couple episodes ago. And episode 5 would be a great one to check out. Emma Jane Westby, she's a recovering developer, as she calls herself. And then Aaron Clark in episode 6 is the sysadmin for IX Systems. And Kylan Gibatera, I believe is how you say her name, is a developer at Citibank and a hackathon addict. She was interviewed in the latest episode, episode 7. There's a lot of really great developer interviews that are showing up in here. It's not all developer related, but there's been quite a few good ones. And episode 7, 6, and 5 are all really excellent to go check them out. and Women's Tech Radio, a new show on Jupiter Broadcasting Network. And I just realized it might be appealing to the developers in the audience, especially those that are either of the lady persuasion or have a lady in their life that might like the topic, especially one who's trying to get into technology. So check out Women's Tech Radio. All right, we have some hoopla that we've got to discuss today because I think it is proving out one of my 2015 predictions, and we're just in the first week. Gosh, I love it when that happens.
Are you about to pour some gasoline on a fire here?
I'm about to observe how a fire is burned from the fuel that I predicted would ignite. That's what I'm doing. Let's hear it. How do you like that? But first, Mr. Dominic, I'm going to tell you about Linux Academy. Then I'm just going to, we'll open up the flood banks and we'll let it flow, my friend. linuxacademy.com/coders. Go over there and get the Coder Radio discount and support the Coder Radio program. Over the holidays, I heard from folks who've been trying out Linux Academy. In fact, I just got a tweet yesterday, and it's really thrilling and exciting to hear people that really get jazzed up when they go in there and they start accomplishing something, they learn something. And when I was in there, we actually had a conversation recently about something we wanted to change on the back end. Like, I don't know anything about it. Oh, it's in Linux Academy. It's in Linux Academy. It's just available as part of my subscription. I went over there. I logged in. Started checking out the course. I'm like, oh, I've got this. I know this. It's so slick. They have step-by-step video courses for you on anything they're going to cover. And they have a whole range of topics with downloadable comprehensive study guides. It comes with your own server when you need one. So they'll just spin it up on the back end. You can choose from 7+ available Linux distributions. You get to keep track of your progress as you go along. Like, here's an example. And this is like something that I really need to wrap my brain around. They've got a Puppet Professional course. You can go from beginner to fully certification ready pro. No kidding. And I've actually, I can back that up. I've heard from several folks that have done this. Or Docker. They've got great courseware on Docker, OpenStack. If you're in that DevOps gray area that Alan and I refuse to fully acknowledge exists, you can get all kinds of material that's perfect for you. If you just want to start implementing backups or learn crontab, if you need to know AWS services, it's all available over at Linux Academy. They're always adding new stuff all the time. Lots of DevOps content, specifically in the last few months. You can go to linuxacademy.com/DevOps specifically to see that. You can check it out. When you go to linuxacademy.com/coders and use our discount, you're going to get access to the library for a little while at our Coder Radio price, and you can really see the value of it. linuxacademy.com. Go over there and check them out. I think you'll be super impressed. They've got a lot of stuff like scenario-based training. They have learning plans where you can tell it how much time you have available, and it'll automatically generate a plan that's like tailored to that time availability and the topic you want to learn. And then, like, when you're on the go, you can still be involved in the learning process because of those downloadable content. Like, they have videos and MP3s. You can listen on the road or in the shower, like Seth. Why not? linuxacademy.com/coders, and a big thank you to Linux Academy for sponsoring the Coder Radio program. Okay, so I predicted, I don't remember if it was in Linux Action Show or Linux Unplugged, that eventually more and more people would switch to Linux from the Mac because people would get frustrated with OS X. And I said, this is why Linux distributions need to step the heck up with their support for the MacBook. Back in the day, there used to be a real effort to reverse engineer some of the stuff in these MacBooks and make Linux work on them, especially in the PowerPC era. But now it's okay. Everybody's just kind of waiting for crap to hit the kernel, and it's really not very well done at this point. Ethernet only works if you hook up the Thunderbolt adapter boot. You want no external display, no thank you. Wi-Fi doesn't work without some foolery. Same with the webcam and, of course, the cooling. But I said I think the OS X experience is frustrating enough that users are going to start switching, because at the end of the day, like Mike here, you've moved over, not fully, but you've moved over to a Linux desktop, and you're like, well, yeah, I've got Chrome and I've got Sublime Text. It's kind of the same everywhere I go. And I think fundamentally it does come down to that. And people will look, I've got this hardware I like, but I'm getting super annoyed with OS X. Yosemite, in my opinion, and I use it specifically for media production, but in my opinion, Yosemite is one of the worst releases of OS X ever. I don't know if it's quite as bad as 10.7 was initially, but it's bad. And I'm not the only one that thinks so. Your buddy, Marco Arment, creator of Instapaper, former guy over at Tumblr, and now the developer of Overcast, he wrote that Apple has lost the functional high ground, and it has generated an internet S-storm of responses that Apple is essentially losing its quality, that the Apple software sucks, and that the latest operating systems have had major problems that back in the day we would have ridiculed Microsoft for. This is all things that I've been saying, and I think this is why people are going to switch to Linux. So Jeff Wozniak or Geoff Wozniak. Now, he pulled down this blog post, but he, over the weekend, a decade OS X developer, has switched to the Linux desktop because of these problems. And it seems to resonate with people so much that CNBC ran with the story from Marco's blog. I'm going to play this and then we'll talk about it.
So over a new piece by the former CTO of Tumblr, Marco Arment, on Apple. The headline is Apple has lost the functional high ground. And the piece, he writes, quote, Apple's hardware today is amazing. It has never been better. But the software quality has taken such a nosedive in the last few years that I'm deeply concerned for its future. He's making the argument that Apple wants to release new software each year, to release it for marketing reasons, but updates are too soon in coming and leading to a host of technical problems each and every time. Have you guys experienced this directly?
Well, Marco is one of the most thoughtful Apple software developers out there, both for iOS and for desktop as well. He was one of the original Tumblr employees. He does Instapaper now as well. And yes, I had experienced this kind of clogging up and over-featuring of the OS. Thought it was just me. Read Marco's post last night and saw people on Twitter like Chris Dixon, Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz commenting that they were experiencing this stuff as well. So I think it's a thing. I think it is a real challenge that Apple's facing right now.
And Apple's stock is down today on the news. And so, I don't know, Mr. Dominic, have you had a chance to noodle on this at all? Do you notice a decline in quality? And do you think this is maybe Chris's prediction coming true?
Okay, so what... All right, so there's a couple major issues, but one of them, I think the biggest issue is, hey, iOS 8, if you're running a 16 gigabyte phone, pretty much makes your phone worthless.
Yeah.
That's not it's kind of a software issue, but that's also, we love margins so much we couldn't give you 32 gigabytes. I mean, really, come on, guys. Yeah.
I'm thinking more in the context of OS X, to be honest.
Okay. So I read his article, and then I heard him on ATP, and I was trying to figure out, what software is he talking about? Because in my opinion, of course it's an opinion, every release of OS X, other than Snow Leopard, that I can remember, and I didn't really do the Mac thing until right before Snow Leopard, was bad, right? Like Snow Leopard was fine. Everything else was a horrible launch in terms of bugginess. And, if you downloaded it day one, which granted is super risky and dumb, you're going to have problems.
Yeah, I just updated our broadcast rig over the holiday break to Mavericks. Because in my opinion, they're not enterprise-grade releases until over a year after release, after all the bug fixes, and I go to the 0.5 release or whatever it is. So I wonder, I know you've been experimenting more and more with Linux on the desktop. What is, I know there's a practical, but what's sort of that geeky motivator underneath that's getting you to want to go over there and check out the grass on the other side of the fence?
Well, one, cost, right? So I needed a second machine for my home office, and I just wasn't buying a Mac. Sorry. We had a Dell XPS just laying around the office, so I just took it and put Ubuntu on it. I actually ended up going with, on your advice, Ubuntu Mate.
You did?
Yeah, so I ended up paving it, taking Unity off, and just putting Mate on.
How's that been working for you?
Fine. It's actually a lot easier for me to use because I used Linux back in the GNOME 2 days.
Yeah.
So it was much less foreign to me.
And is it the one based on 1404?
It's the LTS.
Yeah. Wow. That could be a nice workable box for years.
Well, the other thing is I don't really care, right? I'm using, when I'm working at home, I'm doing Rails. So exactly. I'm using Sublime Text, Chrome, Git, and SSH, right?
Right.
So terminal, and that's it.
See, this is my basic premise, is that this is what a lot of developers are using these MacBooks for, is this kind of stuff. And you could accomplish that on a MacBook Pro with Linux when OS X starts to really bother you.
The problem, though, is the other 75% of my work requires a Mac, right? So right now I'm talking to you on a MacBook Pro connected to a cinema display because, even in Xamarin development, yes, I could totally be running Windows, but not Linux. But that just blows.
I actually wouldn't even downplay the fact that we are now living in an era where a Mac desktop person has a Linux machine on the side and it's still fully functional. I think that's actually more significant. If you think about it from a Mac user's perspective, the fact that a Mac user is now just has a Linux rig on the side, that is a huge shift. Because, there was a time where that kind of thing would never happen.
Okay, but you're painting me as like, the Johnny Appleseed guy.
No,
here.
I don't mean just you. I mean these blog posts indicate that it's happening with other Mac developers as well. This Geoff Wozniak was a 10-year OS X developer when he switched.
Yeah, but there were also plenty of folks who were using Ubuntu doing, back-end web development that switched to Mac for a couple years and now are switching back. I mean, I think the other thing is people aren't buying. I'm just from what I see, a lot of developers are developing on laptops, and they're not keeping them like they used to keep their, big old desktop rig, right? So every 2 years they buy a laptop.
Yeah.
I guess last time they bought Macs, because I got to be honest, liking Ubuntu Mate, Snow Leopard's still better.
Really think?
Yeah, by far. The problem is Yosemite, Lion, Mavericks are in some senses downgrades from what Snow Leopard was.
Right.
And do you know why I love Snow Leopard?
Why?
Because the day I put it on my machine got faster.
That was a cool release, yeah.
And there was no features. It didn't look like Fisher-Price.
That was a good one for the editing stations. I remember that one.
It didn't break all my apps and make them look out of date overnight.
Yeah.
Granted, I also think some of the complaints are going to be, Mac developers who designed their apps and now they look like crap because Yosemite doesn't. It's different, right?
In my opinion, Yosemite, the applications perform poor. Specifically, Motion, Final Cut, and Logic all seem to be very laggy. Whereas in the previous releases, Final Cut felt very fluid, and I was like, oh, so this is the payoff. This is why they rebooted. This is why they built Grand Central Station. This is why they've built all this stuff on OpenCL. This is the payoff. We're finally there. And then I upgraded to Yosemite, and it's back to unusable again. Thankfully, I don't edit anymore, so it's not really my problem. It's Rikai's problem, and we're not upgrading the machine he edits on at this point. But I look at it and I think to make it usable, you have to go and you turn off transparencies, you increase contrast, you do all this stuff, and it still performs worse. And it's disappointing. Every release seems to be less and less reliable. And in my opinion, I think part of the problem is that it is driven by marketing. It's driven, they see the operating system as a feature, and not just from a marketing standpoint too, but actually from a way they do their billing and costs with these devices. They build the cost of development into the cost of the device, so they see it as they see it as hardware and software must go together. And it seems like an impossible pace for them. And I'm looking at these alternatives and I'm thinking more and more people are going to jump. You've got people like Marco Arment who are noticing it though. I mean, that's huge, right? Don't you think that's, he's sort of when he calls it out.
Not really. I mean, it's interesting that he said it, but there have been really crappy Ubuntu releases recently, right? Incredibly shitty Windows releases. Everybody has this problem once in a while.
Well, and that leads me to my next segue. So it seems like potentially Linux's game to win, but let's be legit. Let's real talk here, Mr. Dominic.
How could it be? Wait. How could it be Linux? Okay, I call my Dell rep right after we get off the phone. I'd say I want to buy some developer desktops. He's going to talk to me about Windows 8.
Well, actually, I think he's going to talk to you about Windows 10 in the future because this is a kind of problem that's going to take people a while to really figure out that's bugging them. And by then, Microsoft's going to be talking a lot about Windows 10, and Windows 10 has a lot of power user features. So
you mean Windows 8.2?
Yeah. Did you see that Microsoft is building a new browser in Windows 10 called Spartan? What do you think about this?
Oh, who cares? All right, it depends on who you're talking to, right? If you're talking to a developer, do I give not to get vulgar, but a rat's ass about Spartan?
Don't you?
No, I care about the only web browser engine that matters, WebKit.
So Spartan is still going to use Microsoft's Sharaka JavaScript engine and Microsoft's Trident rendering engine, not WebKit.
So then it might as well not exist.
This is according to sources from Mary Jo Foley.
You know what would be more interesting? I mean, maybe it's because I'm, developer-y. Tell me Visual Studio Community Edition. That's much more interesting. Windows 10 is just changing the UI back to Windows 7, exposing more power user features.
Yeah. Doing everything Windows users like.
Honestly,
seriously,
Windows
that's
10 is the Snow Leopard, right? To Windows 8.
Mm-hmm.
It is the good version of what people like out of Windows 8.
This is going to be their strongest foot forward, obviously, since Windows 7. And I think Apple is in a poor position. I think it's partly how they structure their development shop. I think it's partially maybe people are reporting to the wrong marketing instead of development or something.
It's the simplest thing in the world. If you're doing a complicated piece of software and you have a fixed deadline and a fixed budget, you are screwed.
Right. I mean, to their credit, they ship. I mean, seriously, to their credit, they do ship.
That's not a feature.
No.
Right? They're not doing contract development work for hire. They're building a product. Shipping the product earlier is not a feature.
Are they feeling the heat from Android? Is that what it is?
With Mac OS?
No, I'm going back to iOS now.
Android doesn't update either.
Right. Yeah, the old devices out in the market take forever. So what is it? Why are they doing it? Because they're not really competing against Windows, because Windows doesn't release this fast. Android, while it has fast releases, they don't trickle out to the market for ages.
I think the problem is that they've become so mobile focused that, one thing, I don't think we need a mobile OS update every year. I think it's, I see a lot of our customers at Fingertip, it took months to recover from the iOS 7 transition, right? It was like people aren't using these devices as toys anymore.
Right.
We don't need updates every year. And a desktop workstation, don't update it. Or rather do something like a rolling release where give me security patches.
Small stuff over time.
Right, bug fixes.
Incremental
of course
changes.
I want that. I don't, don't reskin my UI.
So what is this where maybe something like the Google Play API services layer makes a little more sense? If you could keep, because in this way you can keep driving new features to the platform that developers can take advantage of, but you're not replumbing the interface in front of the user every year.
I don't think it's the same thing. See, I think you are creating a false equivalency between mobile and workstations.
Okay. And I guess where I'm getting at is, here's why I am doing that is, I think what Apple is doing is they are taking a mobile mindset, saying the firmware, they want to treat macOS. What they're trying to do, I think, is create the mindset that macOS is like a firmware. It's
a device, right?
Yeah,
it's not a workstation.
Right. Think of a MacBook Air, right? That thing is sealed up. Everything is soldered together. You buy it as it is when you buy it, and then they send you down an update from the App Store. They want you to think about like a yearly firmware cadence, I think, and they're willing to just go balls out to try to do that. Is the only thing I can figure, and that doesn't really help anybody other than Apple's marketing message. And I think developers will smell it and be like, you know what? Ain't nobody got time for that. I'm just going to...
First off, on the Mac side of things, developers are smelling as, we're not making money on the Mac App Store anymore, or did we really ever?
Right.
The Mac App Store sandboxing policies are way too restrictive to do anything useful. Think about longtime Mac developers, the guys who, I forgot their name, but the guys who make Coda, right? If you're not a Mac guy, you wouldn't... Panic, thank you. Huge app used. I've even bought it a couple years ago, an older version.
Yeah.
Guess what? The version on the App Store is hobbled compared to the version you buy through their site with PayPal or whatever.
On our side, on the editing machine, we have software from Rogue Amoeba that we had years and years before. We've bought every version for almost 8 years now, and when they moved to the App Store, we bought those versions, and now we've had to buy the versions that are outside the App Store because they've pulled out of the App Store.
They've discontinued it. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's real tough to take a 30% cut and then restrict what the developers can do. But I mean that's yesterday's fight, right? You're not going to get that back. And I think this is the same thing that happens every year, right? Because really, these types of people came out after Apple did those, that really positive WWDC, right? Where they're like, we're going to open up, you can do all this stuff, and then they turn around and rejected a bunch of apps for little to no reason.
Right, like the calculator widget and stuff like that.
Right, so they already pissed a lot of people off.
Right. This is some of that.
And then they released, then Yosemite was found to be...
subpar.
I would say disappointing. Maybe not disappointing, but it didn't meet the hype, right? So there were some issues, right? Like some of the stuff doesn't work as smoothly as you would like. In particular, the thing where you connect your phone and answer phone calls is great, except if I have my Mac off and then I come back to my office, it has to notify me about all the phone calls I actually missed while I was in the car or something like that. It's crazy. It's annoying.
Oh, really? I would never use that. I've learned with Google Voice, it drives me crazy when all my devices ring.
Right, and especially if you have your phone on silent and then the freaking Mac rings, which is beautiful. But
Yeah. Oh, man.
I don't know. I see where you're coming from, but I think this to me is a cyclical thing that happens every 18 months, right? Apple gets on their high horse, starts rejecting developers' apps.
Yes.
People get pissed off. Right. Apple says nothing.
I think there's a component you're missing, too, is specifically guys like Marco who are in the position of commentating on Apple. when Apple is doing nothing, like taking holiday breaks and not releasing products, because Apple has just slow periods, they sort of look around for things to comment on, and they often find things that bother them, and they bring them out, and they sort of harp on them for a while. And then when things like product releases happen and WWDC comes around, everything's great, everything's fun, everything's exciting, here's the future, it's amazing.
You know, I don't think that's fair, actually. I mean, if you look at it from his perspective, his livelihood is based on Apple apps, right? On iOS apps, basically. If they're being capricious or arbitrary in their rejections, that's pretty scary.
Oh, sure, yeah. No, I agree with you on that, yeah. Yeah, the App Store.
I don't think he's pandering. I think he's...
No, I didn't mean that. I think it's like... I think it's sometimes when there's not a lot to talk about, you look for something to talk about. A little bit.
Yeah, but nobody looked for this, right? Everybody was surprised when they decided to turn around and arbitrarily reject stuff. I was surprised when I heard about it.
Yeah.
I thought they had gotten past that crazy crap.
I guess to me it just seems like I guess I just when I heard that I was like, oh yeah, of course that sounds like Apple. That's not surprising to me. It wasn't.
See, the thing is, because you were a little bit on the outside, you haven't actually dealt with them. They had stopped doing that for the most part. So, you know, I can tell you, I hadn't seen an app rejected in about a year, up until this fall, because they were very liberal. And they were much more communicative in the process. If they had a question, instead of rejecting it and then asking you the question, they would simply call you or email you and ask you the question. I think what happened is this, and who knows why, right? Maybe because of the holiday rush that always happens, they got a little more strict. But whatever the reason is, the expectation they set at WWDC and their actions during this very busy app review season did not match. So people got upset. And frankly, I think the developers are right to be upset because, you know, what does it hurt Apple if I can do 2 + 2 is 4 in a widget?
Here's what I think. I think big time developers like EA and your Angry Birds, you know, your Rovios, they never run into this. They have the cachet. Apple sometimes will reach out to them first. You know, where it impacts are your independent developers, your small-time developers. And I feel like they're just, you know what, at a certain point, they don't have the time, they don't have the energy, and they definitely don't have the money to risk it. And they're just going to look elsewhere. It's either going to be a web app or it's going to be Android. And I think it's...
No chance. Absolutely not. Maybe Android, but it's not going to be a web app. You're just not going to get any revenue.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, show me a profitable web app that isn't really a software as a service.
Right. Yeah.
You're just not going to do it. You're not going to. I mean, there's also an argument that really, if you're trying to go for profits on apps, you're not doing a straight sale either. But I think you're missing the broader point of they hadn't done this for almost a year. Like they had actually, and I can tell you from personal experience, they had called me, they had emailed me asking questions. You know, they had let me put myself down as the rep for my customers, so that rather than my customer get the scary email from Apple, I would get it. And that I could deal with them because sometimes customers just panic, right?
Right. Yes.
Then they decided not to do that. And it created, its expectations. This is kind of like if your kid just got potty trained, then he took a crap on the floor. You're pretty upset. Right? Like you're not happy because you thought you were done with it.
We worked this out.
Right. We had a deal. You were going to wipe and poop on the toilet.
Right. Yeah, I do understand your point there. I guess, see, I do look at it. I always look at it from a wider, like, what is Apple's overall long-term nature when I look at these kinds of things. And to me, what you perceived as this is Apple's new behavior, to me, was more perceived as, well, if you average it out, this is just an anomaly. Because their nature is to treat that thing like an appliance, like a consumer electronics device, like a Nintendo, where you get it and it has, very specific things you can do for it, and the App Store is known for very specific things. It's part of their image. It's part of the brand, and they can only go so long without going back to that. And without, I'm sure, maybe somebody like Phil Schiller coming down going, what are these apps? These don't represent what our iPhone is all about. It's too complicated. Having buttons in the pull down, that's too complicated. Get it out of here. I could see that happening. So it just doesn't. Anyways, I just think overall it's a meta story of people are going to get tired of this crap. You think not? I think it can't. I think by the end of 2015 something's going to have to give here.
Well, I think the only way you could be right is if the revenue story on Android or the web got so much better, or that the revenue story on iOS got so much worse. right?
I think the Android one is just bound to happen. Eventually, it's just bound to happen.
Maybe. I mean, I can tell you the experience of, in one way, developing Android apps is a little more painful when you run into the specific, Samsung doesn't like to render colors the right way issue. But deployment is great, right? Google Play's backend is far better than iTunes Connect.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, half a dozen, six one way. But I don't see it happening because I don't, unless people are going to start spending money on the Android store. I mean, what would cause that?
Yeah, I think it will be. I think the Play Store will start getting it. I think Google is pretty aware of this problem, and Google is the master at connecting things to required things that you normally wouldn't sign up for things, but if you need access to this one thing, you're going to have to put your information in this other thing, and now you have this thing. And I think I think Google will do everything it takes to get your credit card information into a button that's connected in the Google Play Store. If it's through voice, if it's through Hangouts, if it's through Google Plus, if it's through AdWords, if it's through TV content, music, whatever they can come up with, and they're not done yet. If it's through YouTube subscriptions so you can support your favorite YouTube artists or get paid, they're going to connect that button. And then once those buttons, they're going to have a million different reasons to connect that button. And it's not going to be one big thing. It's going to be 1,000 cuts, and people are going to be signed up, and pretty soon they're going to have money behind that button, and people are going to be buying Android apps. Because Google has that massive scale where they can just funnel in the people over time. That's my suspicion. And then once people, that's what I suspect. And then once that starts to happen, I just think people won't have the time to put up with Apple. I'm not saying it's going to happen right away, but I think you're going to see it happen on two fronts. Right. I think you're going to see it happen not with all developers, not with the majority of developers, but I think you're going to see it happen with a percentage of web developers will move their desktops over to Linux. Not a lot, but probably a respectable percentage because of these annoyances. All of these essentially marketing debts that they're paying for, Apple's marketing debt that they're pushing onto the operating system users, they're going to get sick and tired of paying for that, and they're going to move over to an operating system that has zero marketing debt, no marketing influence over your desktop experience, which is amazingly liberating and also very self-assuring that something's not going to go in a crazy direction because of a new vision, and people will move over because of that on the desktop front. Developers on the iOS front will get frustrated about the iOS App Store situation. Not wholly, but a percentage will, just like the desktop. Not all of them, but a noticeable percentage. And I think revenues will go up on the Android store. I think this is the year where that transition happens.
Maybe. I'm not sure I buy it, but we'll see what happens.
I don't know if it'll be done by the end of the year, but I just look at Apple doesn't seem to be shaking up, and I suspect it's some of the old guard that's still around that probably isn't going anywhere because they're pretty well entrenched. That's my theory, Mr. Dominic. I'd love to hear the audience's theory. Go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/contact and choose Coder Radio. Let us know, or go to coderradio.reddit.com and submit your thoughts. What do you got going on this week, Mr. Dominic? Anywhere you want to send people?
No, just DominicM.com.
DominicM.com. Also, you can check him out on Twitter. And I'm on Twitter, too. I think I have links in the show notes, so go click those. Don't forget you can join us live on Mondays. Go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar and see the live time in your local time zone. It's noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, jblive.tv. You can participate in the chat room and bang suggest away to help title our show. But really, that subreddit, coderradio.reddit.com. We'll have a feedback thread in there. You can also just start a thread in there. Submit topics, discussions. We love it. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for tuning this week's episode of Coder Radio. See you right back here next week.